Hi, Larissa. How are
Hello.
you?
Hi.
Hi.
Oh,
My name is Mindy Foreman. I was part of the search committee that helped call Reverend Larissa Romero, and I would love to introduce her to you. Pastor Larissa comes from serving Downtown Presbyterian Church in Nashville, where she was the interim pastor. Prior to that, she served Pascack Reformed Church in Park Ridge, New Jersey as a solo pastor. And then she was at Scarsdale Congregational Church in Scarsdale, New York, and Greenpoint Reformed Church in Brooklyn. She continues to be blessed by lots of love in her life, incredible friends. She has caring in-laws, an amazing aunt and cousins, her parents, Darla and Gabe Romero, sister Aaliyah, brother-in-law Will, a hyperactive pup named Strider, a fierce cat Collie, daring comrade and husband George, and her most recent addition to the family and greatest joy, daughter Fria Democracia.
And I am Kat Gaskins. I am a member of the governance team for Park Hill United Church of Christ. And I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the process for today and then what will happen when Pastor Larissa visits us. Most of the Saturday afternoon visit during the candidate weekend will give congregants a chance to discuss theological issues and aspirational issues with you. This is a time to allow the congregation to get to know you personally. Reverend Larissa, please start out by telling us some things you would like us to know, and then we will follow up with some questions to explain further.
sure. So the main things that I would love you to know are how much I love being a pastor. I really, really find a joy in it. So, in particular, getting to connect with people and learning about all the things that just make them so inherently beautiful and gorgeous. I really delight in that process. So, in terms of our relationships together, just know that I'm going to be coming with a brimming curiosity and deep excitement. I find a lot of joy in this work, and I hope that we can have that joy resonate together as we go out into the world to do this thing of ministry together. So that'd be the big thing I think in our life together. I'd want to share first.
We talked a little bit about your family in the introduction that you had sent me, but is there anything more you want to tell us, either from growing up or about your family now?
Sure. So I grew up in northern New Jersey in a town called Elmwood Park, which is right next to Paterson. If you know Paterson, you might not. William Carlos Williams grew up there, if you're thinking about modern poets, but you might not be when you think of New Jersey. But the Red Wheelbarrow Guy, Paterson, New Jersey. So I grew up right next to him and to Paterson, and I spent my entire childhood there, and then went to college in Pennsylvania, in the Philadelphia area on the main line. And from there, I took a class on women, gender, and sexuality in the New Testament, actually at Haverford University, because all of the religion classes were over there. So I went there um, and it just blew my mind. So then I ended up in New York City, and I grew up like 20 minutes outside of New York City, and I never really ventured in that much. And then all of a sudden I was living there, and I was like, why am I living? Why was I ever living anywhere else? This is so amazing. So I loved it. Um, it was the most mind and heart altering experience. I was there during Occupy. I was there as Black Lives Matter was beginning. And so it was just quite the time to be learning activism, organizing, and how all that intersects with theology in the city. So that was a wonderful experience. Then, so I would say those were kind of like my most formative. That was me forming throughout the years, and New Jersey has primarily been home throughout all of that. So if you ask me where I'm originally from, I'm always going to say New Jersey. That's it. And when I get really upset, you can hear it. You can hear me with the accent a little bit. So yeah.
And where did you go to school? And then what did you study at all the various different levels?
Mm. So I went to undergrad at Bryn Mawr College, and I studied anthropology mainly because I wanted to be an archaeologist. I I, I loved Indiana Jones when I was little, and I didn't realize until I got to college just how romanticized and colonialist all of that was. And but that's part of the growth. And so I went there, and then I realized, on top of all of the kind of problematic view that I brought to archaeology, on top of that, I also have a terrible memory. And this is before uh, you could just look things up on your smartphones. Like, I didn't have a smartphone in college. And so one of the tests, this was like a deciding factor for me. One of the tests was we had to label every river along the left side of South America. Um, and I could not do it. I took that test 3 times and I was not able to do it. I just couldn't memorize all of those. And so I just realized, yeah, this might not be the field for me. Um, and then I took that class I was talking about in on women and gender and sexuality in the New Testament with Professor Anne McGuire, who did one of the original translations of an early Christian work called Thunder Perfect Mind. And that just like blew it open for me. It was just very obvious that I needed to continue to learn about New Testament, to learn about women's role in early Christianity, and then just the whole faith deconstruction kind of really started there. And then continued in seminary. I went to Union Theological Seminary in New York City, and that was a really blessed time, I think, primarily because we got to live on campus with our classmates and also our professors. So we just run into people at 2 a.m. in the morning and have this big blowout conversation that might have screaming, sometimes would have crying, oftentimes had hugs, um, and um, and had a lot of, and really delved into that faith deconstruction, but also reconstruction, right? Realizing what it meant for us to be people doing this thing called practical theology. So I loved my time at Union. I adored it, and I ended up I met my husband George there, third day of orientation, and we ended up moving in together um, in a little apartment a few blocks away with 2 other folks from the seminary. We all lived together for 3 years. And then George and I got married, and we got a puppy who is Strider, who is named after the Lord of the Rings character, Aragorn. So, and who you might hear depending on how he gets at this moment. And let's see, I had gotten Kali, our cat, while I was in seminary. So she had been kind of my little familiar running around the seminary with me there. But then we got Strider after we got married, and then moved out to New Jersey for me to start this call at PASCAC. And while I was there, George discerned a call to, originally he'd been doing a lot of chaplaincy. He'd been doing hospice chaplaincy. He'd been a chaplain at Rikers Island. He'd had all manner of like really depressing, and he decided he was going to continue in that direction and go into military chaplaincy. And if you get a chance, you should talk to him about that sometime, because it's interesting to hear him discuss the similarities between all the different like poverty pipelines, and the military is one of those. And so he wanted to care for the kids that he grew up with, right? And I can't talk enough about how amazing he is. So like one of the things that he ended up being, we ended up living apart. And while I was pastoring in New Jersey, he was chaplaining at Arlington Cemetery down in DC. Full time. And he got to do all kinds of lovely things because as chaplain, he's given a lot of permission that other officers are not. And so he was able to kind of go in and interrupt a training or a drill and read them Pablo Neruda for a little bit. Go like, gather around, chickens. I'm gonna read you some of Pablo Neruda for a moment. So he did a lot to bring all kinds of good. Oh, and he's coming in right now. So I might have him do a quick hello here for a second. But so we were living apart for those 4 years, and here he is. Hey, can you say a quick hello?
To whom am I saying hello?
To the good folks at Park Hill. I was just singing your praises and talking about the time that we were apart. So this is George.
Nice to meet you, George.
This is my
Hi.
cousin Conrad.
Good to meet you.
Good to meet you both.
To
We
meet
look
you.
forward to meeting you both in person.
You have a fantastic one here. So, yeah, great job.
Thank you. We're excited.
Yeah.
So we were apart for 4 years, and then we got really tired of that. And he wanted to get into a PhD program. He'd been wanting to get into a PhD program for forever, and so he applied and got into Drew, and then also Vandy. And we had to kind of decide what we were going to do. And we said, let's do the scarier one that includes us moving halfway across the country into a culture that's entirely unknown to us. So that's what we did. We came out here to Nashville. I was pregnant at the time, so it was pandemic. I was pregnant, and we made this move out to Nashville, and it was wonderful. So I got to. He's been having the time of his life in his program. He does a lot of work on what they're calling deep solidarity and a solidarity economy and how that could integrate into churches. So it's really interesting work having to do with cooperatives and he's really interested in eco-justice as well. And so his work is bridging those things. And I've loved my time with Downtown Pres. They've been an absolute joy. And now it's time for the next bright new adventure with you all. That's pretty much all of it. That's the whole thing. You asked me about school and you got everything.
We love that. Well, and I kind of skipped over this in your introduction, but I'd love for you to tell us more about your painting and your prayer through both painting and gardening in your own words, because I just find it fascinating.
Yeah. So I don't know about you all. I grew up with this idea that prayer is like folded hands and your head is bowed and you're non-verbally or verbally communicating with God. And then as I was pastoring, I ended up going into spiritual direction and therapy at the same time, which were both incredibly necessary for me as I was learning what it meant to guide and love a congregation well, and working on my own stuff at the same time. And part of that meant redefining how I understand prayer and how important prayer was. I have a dear, dear mentor who was my New Testament professor in seminary, and he's been my guide ever since. And one of the first things that he told me as I started pastoring was like, Larissa, one of the main ways you understand or you can see theological health in an individual or in a system, like a congregational system, is prayer life. And I really took that to heart and was like, well, my prayer life isn't really much more than just my folded hands and bowed head. So I need to kind of figure that out some more. So I took Lent one year, and I had at the same time I had seen a woman who's a synesthetic artist or has synesthetic. She has synesthesiology. I think I'm saying that correctly, but basically the wires in her brain are crossed such that she sees music and she paints that. And I had seen some of this on social media and I thought, this is the most gorgeous thing I've ever seen. And I also feel really called to try and like replicate that experience. And so I paired that with like, I need to deepen prayer and it needs to be something other than just me having this heady experience. It needs to be like more embodied. I need to do something that has me making something that's creative. And that has me experiencing grace through that creative act, right? Because it's one thing to be told you're fine, you're beautiful, everything's okay. And it's another thing to be actively in the midst of creating something that doesn't look like anything or doesn't feel like it could be beautiful, and that is coming entirely from you. And then over the process of it to go, oh no, it's okay that that's me. And in fact, this is beautiful. And it never had to be perfect at any point along the way to be what it is now, which is wonderful, right? It's a very different, like tangible experience of the grace that I try to access, I had tried to access just doing this. So I spent a whole season painting abstract art and like flinging paint and feeling that, and like, my dad, God bless his heart, got me these like huge 4 by 4 foot wood panels because they're really cheap, right? And brought them down to the basement for me, of the parsonage where I was living. And I just kind of went to town. At one point, I put them on the ground and was like, using like uh, mops to like, instead of just regular paintbrushes. And so I like delved into this whole world that was so incredibly important to me. And that's still how that's one of the main ways I pray, is if I'm having big feelings and I need those feelings validated in some way, and I need to feel like God sees my feelings and it's entirely fine, and not just fine, like really important. They're very important. Um, then that's what I do. So I love doing that. I paint to pray. And then I can get into a whole other thing at some point. This will probably come up in a sermon at some point, but I there's also some linkages there too to my heritage and my relationship with my father, who's an art teacher. He was a public school art teacher in Harlem, and all kinds of things there. And so there's that portion. And then for the gardening, again, when I started solo pastoring for the first time, and I was relatively new out of seminary, and I had very grand ambitions for what I would do in relationship with the church. And and they weren't entirely realistic. And also very frustrating to me, right? Because I wanted to just go. I mean, I'm pretty far lefty, and so I just kind of thought like, and that ties into my Christianity really deeply. And so I just kind of thought, well, I'm going to talk about Black Lives Matter out the gate, and it's going to be fine. And like, we're just going to start on a racial reconciliation project. No problem, right? Like, I just give a couple of the right sermons, and that everyone's going to want to do this, right? It's not what happens. So, so I think I started gardening because it helped me focus on being patient with that which grows slowly, and that things grow well when they grow slowly, right? And they grow more sustainably when they grow slowly. I still have there's still parts of me that are like, well, the time to do justice is now. And so we just have to get on it, right? That's constantly in tension with this reality of organizational, how organizations and systems move forward together. So that's a tension that constantly plays out in my life. And that's why I need gardening to help me remember how important the slow aspect is, for when I kind of have read the latest book that makes me go, well, clearly this needs to change immediately. um, so those are my 2 prayer practices. Yeah.
Besides painting and gardening and your pets and your family, what else do you do for fun? What other activities do you enjoy?
Honestly, just those things and hanging out with friends. I love to read at night, like right before bed. I have like my theological book that I read, and I have my like fun book that I read. And so I like to do that at night. That honestly, that takes up all of my time. That's all that I have room for. Is to do that, and naps, by the way. I'm very much in line with, I don't know if you've heard of the Nap Bishop and the Nap Ministry, but I'm really into rest is resistance. I think I'm really here for that. So wherever there's a moment in my day where I can be a cat and take like a quick 20-minute nap, I'm really here for that.
You've been with several different churches. Is there a fun thing that you've done at one of them that you might do at Park Hill, or a few things that you kind of got in mind?
Yeah. So I think just in terms of doing like dreaming together, I think like having some good sessions where we're asking ourselves like, what is our God-sized dream? Like, what is the thing that's bigger than any one of us or even us as a group that we feel like God is calling us as a church to do? That's something that I'm really excited about because when I think when we can hold our vision really clearly in our heads and hearts and our bodies, it makes decision making a lot easier, right? Like it's a lot easier to be in a meeting and go like, should we do this or this? Oh, well, which one follows this ultimate dream that we have together? Oh, that one much more does. Well, let's do that. Even if it's maybe a little bit harder or if it feels a little more uncomfortable, it seems like maybe we're called to do that instead. So I enjoy doing that with churches. Um, in terms of like rituals, I've for some reason every church I've gone to um have had they've had a history of doing star words, and for some reason doing that during Epiphany, it tends to be this like really formative moment spiritually for churches. I think because oftentimes when we get to the new year, and this happens a lot too in like self-help life, right? Where we get this like, well, if you just check this list and you lose 10 pounds, then you're going to be great. And that happens a lot at the beginning of the year. We kind of put that pressure on ourselves. And it says a lot to grace-filled living, I think, that we go, here's your star word. Here's the one thing that's just meant to guide you throughout the year for you to focus on. And no, it's not about you losing weight, and it's not about you cutting your hair the right way, and it's not about, like you getting a whole new wardrobe. It is about not this like weird consumerist thing, right? It's about you just thinking about strength and where that exists in your life every day. That's like changed. I've seen that change the way that people talk about their winters, and winter tends to be a hard spiritual season. So, especially like right after Christmas, but before Lent, that like after Epiphany season, that tends to be like a down time in churches. So there's that. I remember at Pascac, um, we had Pentecost, which is coming up pretty soon. We had a special Pentecost celebration where there was just this lovely moment where all of the teachers got together with me and we said, what do we want to do? Because it's the day that we celebrate the children, right? Primarily for that church it was. So we're like, what do we want to do that's like going to be a nice surprise for them? And so all of the teachers spent the Saturday morning before blowing up red balloons. And we attached and like balloons that like had, the helium in them that would send them up. And then huge red strings, tied them to like ridiculously long red strings and put doves at the end of them. And then we laid them down on the ground and like put sheets over them. And there must have been like 50 balloons that we had gotten and put at the front. And then at the very end of service, I had the children come up and I played the Firebird for them. Like that very end part, da 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 da. And as the Firebird started going, the teachers like unleashed the balloons and all of the balloons started rising as like Stravinsky was crescendoing. And like there were pictures and like people were taking videos of like the kids just standing under it, like this is amazing. All of these balloons are going up. Um, and then they gave the benediction underneath all the balloons as like the very last bits of the piece were ending. And that's one of those like rituals that just kind of like stays with you and you're like, that's just too good to not do again at some point. Like that is just too much fun. And I think is so much of what we want to do together in worship, right, is kind of bring out a sense of awe and wonder and deep reverence and like great joy, like and surprise at what we can do together and how we can feel together. So I think something like that might be fun. That's it, right? I think together, it's finding ways to like get together in a little group and be like, oh, what could we do that would just make everybody gasp for a moment? More things like that. I like doing with churches, and I would want to do with you all.
So, besides coming to Park Hill, which we know you're very excited about, what excites you and your family most about moving to Denver? Because it's obviously very different than Tennessee or New Jersey or.
Yeah, I think that it is very different than anywhere we've been before. I think that fact alone is intriguing, and we're just like, let's do this. That sounds like a fun adventure. Um, I'm not an outdoorsy person. Like I like gardening, but I'm not a hiker. But I do love natural beauty. I have always wanted to have a Lenten experience in the desert, and that seems like that might be a possibility out there with you all. Um, and Denver is known as a spiritual hub of innovation. There, there are all kinds of projections around like where the church is going, right? Like, and essentially like Pacific Northwest and like the west of Colorado, like all of that is understood as well. Folks are generally more secular, and they're more progressive. And so this tends to be probably where most of church is going to be 50 years from now. And a lot of like church innovation seems to happen in the Denver, Portland, Seattle area. So with that reputation, there's also this like peaked, oh, I wonder what all there is to learn from the like variety of theological communities that are necessarily in Denver. And like any city, I think my husband and I have discovered we are city people. We want to be in cities. We like urban areas. We like cultural diversity. We like kind of being thrown into whatever the zeitgeist is and experiencing that. So I think Denver as a city, Denver is a place that is growing, that has a lot of different neighborhoods, that offers a lot to explore in terms of different people and also different organizations that are kind of on the horizon of where church is going. Like all of that seems very exciting, and we are here for it.
So shifting back to something that you mentioned earlier about that you read both something theological as well as something for just pleasure and fun. What's on your bookshelf right now?
Yeah, so let's see. I just started two things. There's a book called Chicana Art by Professor Laura Perez, I believe that's her name. I hope I'm getting that right. But because I had seen her at a panel at the American Academy of Religion conference, I went and I got her book because she talks about the intersections between art, spirituality, religion, and specifically how that like interweaves within the Chicana worldview here in the United States. So I've started reading that, and it is wonderful. I'm only like halfway through the introduction with that. And I have been listening to this podcast called Lift Every Voice. And it's essentially New York City has a classical musical station called WQXR. And one of the hosts, Terrence McKnight, is Black. I think he would identify as Black instead of African American. I need to double check that. And he hosts this podcast now that takes these like supremacist laden operas and puts a Black lens on them. And so he did one series on Othello. And apparently in this podcast that he shared, apparently Toni Morrison and Peter Sellers worked together to create an opera called Desdemona based on some of the themes that he was talking about in response to the racism of Othello. So I found it. I found Desdemona. So that is on my bookshelf as well. And I have not started reading that yet, but I am about to. That's a tonight thing that's gonna happen.
Well,
Hey,
so
bud.
we're going to take it even lighter to kind of wrap up here. And we're going to do some either or questions. So, apples or oranges?
Apples.
Spring or fall?
Spring.
Android or iPhone?
iPhone.
Creamy or crunchy?
Creamy.
Watch sports or play sports?
Neither.
Time machine or magic wand?
Oh. Ooh, that's hard. There are so many like conditional questions I want to ask as a follow-up. Are we talking like Harry Potter wand here? Like, are there like certain social norms around the kinds of spells I can cast? Does time machine have any limitations on it? Am I going to go forward and meet like the Margwats or whatever they were called in the H.G. Wells thing? Like, what are the parameters? Because I love my sci-fi and fantasy, like you would not believe. I think the Potter ahead in me wants to go magic wand.
All right. All right. Well, great. That was good.
That was fun.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell the congregation before we get to meet you in person?
Just that I cannot wait. I'm so excited to get to learn all of the things that you love and to love them with you. That's really it.
We're really looking forward to meeting you in person and hearing you speak and visit with us all.
It will be wonderful.
And thank you
Thank
so
you for
much
the
for your
time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good one.